welcome everybody. My name is Jill Hannaford and I have the absolute honour of being the chair of the advisory board for the Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Initiative, and it's my job today to introduce you to our panellists and to kick the session off. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to particularly acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are in the room or online and have joined us today. Thank you. The Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Institute, we need an abbreviation for that for sure, was established at the University of Sydney in 2013, and it was the result of a generous donation from Warren Halloran. The initiative honours his father Henry, who was an active advocate for town planning in the first half of the 20th century. Our goal is to promote scholarship, innovation and research in town planning, urban development and land management. We achieve this through collaborative cross-disciplinary and industry research that generates innovative approaches to urban and regional policy and development issues. The Festival of Regenerative Urbanism, which is why you're all here today, is running from the 14th of September to the 20th of October, all around Australia, and in particular in Sydney until the 2nd of October. And why regenerative urbanism? Well, regenerative urbanism is about transforming spaces for people and the planet through the holistic action for systemic change. In an era of polycrisis defined by climate threat, social inequity and biodiversity loss, we really must rethink systems for food, energy, water, transport, land and housing, beyond sustainability or minimising harm, and far from the heavy-handed models of urban regeneration. A regenerative paradigm seeks to heal, restore, renew and revitalise ecosystems, actively improving environmental and social well-being. From leading First Nations experts in landscape design and architecture to urban agriculture, restorative infrastructure, circular industries and the creative economy, speakers and events at this year's Festival of Regenerative Urbanism offer a new and exciting possibilities for change. And on that note, I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Jennifer Kent. Jennifer is the Robinson Fellow at the University of Sydney and renowned for her research on the intersection of urban planning, transport and public health. So Jennifer will introduce the session today and the panellists, and I'd like you to offer her a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thank you all for coming today. It's really lovely to see a good crowd of faces here. So we're here to talk about regenerative roads. And in that context, I want to bring to your attention the fact that back in 1954, beginning of around November, Craig Jackson of Wiley Park was crossing Canterbury Road and got hit by a car. He died and attracted the wrath of what is there called a number of irate mothers who formed a human chain on the road to stop the traffic at New Canterbury Road at school crossing time and insist that a crossing was installed with a police guard. Some of the mothers were arrested. Now, since that time, we haven't kept age-specific data on fatalities on our roads until 1989, when we started to stratify data by age and make that publicly accessible. 4,550 kids have died on Australian roads. Those kids have followed Craig to an early grave. We call that the road toll. Let's think about that word toll. It implies a transaction. A transaction implies something that we are willing to pay for a good or a service. It implies that we are willing to pay for the life of Craig, for the 4,550 other children that died with him and the families that suffered that tragedy, for the convenience, comfort, speed, accessibility of what we call our road system. Now, I know I'm here talking to the converted, preaching to the choir, and I love it. I don't want to stand here giving you horrible figures about road tolls. I want to stand here and start talking about what we can do to make this better. How we can make our roads not just conduits of carbon and catastrophe and chaos and commerce. How we can change our road systems to reflect something that we actually want to see in our cities. So today, I've been so proud and lucky to bring together three people who I think have all very different, but each as exciting and interesting perspectives on how we might go about that task. We're starting off with Professor Kevin Kryzak, who's joining us from the University of Colorado in Boulder. Kevin is an expert in sustainable transport systems, and he has developed a novel approach to how we can hand some of our road space back to the people who actually belong using those roads and away from cars. He's going to be discussing that, and he'll be followed by Sarah Stace from the Better Streets Network, who'll be painting us a picture of some of the more joyous things that we could do with our road spaces and what that could actually look like. And then, hoping not to end on a downer, we have Eamon Waterford from the Committee for Sydney, CEO of the Committee for Sydney, to paint us some realities of how that's going to come to pass in a context like Sydney, which is so car dependent and so driven by the need and speed and comfort, convenience of car dependency. So on that note, I will hand you over to Kevin Kryzak.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and I just want to thank you and Nicole as well. This is such a wonderful opportunity to share thoughts with you and be part of this community. The topic is one that is near and dear to many of our hearts. What many of us have been attracted to in terms of this topic has been a source of frustration for many of us as well, myself included. And I am going to simply try to leave you with 3 points. The first is that for us, at least in the United States, we're dealing with a major public health crisis. Traffic violence. Second, the remedies that we have historically thrown at this crisis have been largely constrained by our own blinders or parameters or lack of aperture, constrained by issues of motor normativity, I would claim. And the third is that streets provide a very, very valuable public space for us to lean into. And not only can we lean into streets for a solution space to open up, but we can lean into streets with slower speeds as a very strong opportunity to see where different interests collide or intersect or share. Okay. I come from Colorado. This still works, I assume? Which is in the mountains of the Rocky Mountain West. And we border up against mountain parks, and mountain parks often have mountain lions. And when there's a mountain lion that attacks a human, they shut the park down. And they do an investigation. Last week, this may ring a similar bell. And Sarah is going to talk more about what happens when we think about sharks and think about what happens on our streets in the same breath. But typically, we shut down the beach and we do an investigation until we can get a better handle on what's going on. Now, what happens to the sources of calamities, fatalities, however you want to describe it, in the United States? We have the Centers for Disease Control. They basically put death in 2 different categories: intentional death, homicides; unintentional death, accidental poisoning, motor vehicle crashes; unintentional. Nothing is taking the lives of Americans between the ages of 5 and 24, more than motor vehicle crashes. This is with an exception. Fentanyl is now usurping that. Still, the numbers are grave. The numbers are on the rise. They're about a third of what you may deal with on a daily basis here in Australia. But still, your numbers are not insignificant. So are we dealing with the same level of public health crisis? Are we dealing with a lesser public? Well, who defines what a crisis is? It has our own mindsets behind what we think a crisis is. Most of us don't think that we're in a crisis. But we're losing a lot of lives. We're losing this many lives in the United States, owing to this phenomenon that Jennifer already alluded to. Now, what's going on here is that there are many sources at work. Of course, the burden is to be shared across many shoulders. There's several factors that are leading to why this might be getting worse now. I'm happy to talk about that. But what has been restraining our ability to kind of lean into this issue, I would claim, having studied, having been exposed to, having listened to the conversations on this topic for almost 30 years, 3 decades, is that most of our views of the world are constrained by what we think that we need a motor vehicle to do. And unless we kind of go to the root of the problem, we're not going to be able to make meaningful progress on this issue. And making meaningful progress on this issue is very, 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 very difficult because it's not one of those issues that people really want to talk about, first of all, I've noticed. The second is that we don't have agreement on what to do. And the third is if we make a change, which needs to be a noticeable change, I would claim, what's my incentive for that change and who's got my back if and when this change needs to happen, the political pressures. So our typical response to when we have a motor vehicle fatality, and go with me counterclockwise here, is that we clean up the crash as quick as we can. And we pretend like it almost didn't happen because we're assuming that we had an optimum system to begin with. Now, is that an errant assumption to begin with? Again, for those of us who have been studying this topic for a while, yes, that's an errant assumption. But 98% of the world doesn't see it that way. They see that we have an optimum system operating right now, and so let's make sure to clean that crash up and so that I can get on with my daily life. Now, assuming we can do that, then we're going to take a step and do an investigation, which normally results in assigning blame to someone shouldn't have been doing something there, or we issue condolences. Poor Mary, should have never happened to her. Another life taken too early. Or we satisfy what we need to satisfy for the insurance report. And then we move on. We tend to forget about it. We go back to operations as normal. We might do a traffic study, maybe. We might do something and put something into a capital improvement plan that might come to fruition in like 8 years. Maybe. That's only if you have the funding. And all the meanwhile, more horses have escaped from the barn. You kind of wait for the next crash, hoping that something changed. Now, this is the do-nothing feedback loop for a failure in the transportation. Our surface transportation system has failed. Somebody died, regardless of who we want to point the finger at. And the failure is resulting in basically a do loop of doing more of the same. And I would claim that this is kind of the problem that we're getting ourselves into. And the reason that we have been getting ourselves into this is because we have a whole slew, at least in the United States, of very stringent regulations. You guys, I'm sure, have similar setups. One that tells you how to paint the road. Another one tells you how many parking spaces you need, and so on and so forth. And these rules and regulations and these institutional standards, they really hold us to doing more of the same. And as my colleague David Levinson has told us, the enemy of the future is now, and vice versa. So because we're being held into these kind of rigid academic, they're not even academic, they're legal standards, reinforcing that we do more of the same. And so for one who has taken a passion in how do streets change and how streets could possibly change and how streets could be a regenerative engine for a city it's of active interest of mine to see how, why, where we can't change our streets, and why we tend to kind of keep doing more of the same, even though out of this side of the mouth we say, oh, streets are such wonderful public spaces for vitality and whatnot. Okay, now, what does that mean in terms of our ability to look at an urban system and see where the quickest levers for change are? Back to the investigation component, though, first. When we see a rail crash, the National Transportation Safety Board does an investigation. When we have an airline crash, the National Transportation Safety Board does an investigation. They do an investigation when a pilot runs off the runway because they inadvertently tried to avoid a turtle. Unfortunately, I think 3 people died in this crash, but 3 people is how many crashes we see on a somewhat daily basis in a lot of cities in the United States. We never do any such investigations. Back to the story of roads and streets, and how streets and roads are a very, very, very important opportunity for us to see through how urban systems function. Roads are as old as dirt. They're as old as the Roman Empire. The Romans built really, really, really good roads. And when I say roads, I realize, and it is important to differentiate between roads and streets, but right now I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. Roads, streets, they provide access to the land. The roads and streets typically are public space. They're our most cherished public space in a city. And they hold enormous potential in terms of being an opportunity. I like to use that word, yes, because it is one that is so seldom realized in terms of what we can do tomorrow. We can switch the lanes of which way traffic flows, like that. We can open and close a street like that when we need to. Look at COVID. I love using this example in Bologna, where anytime you do some sort of road excavation, you see where the Roman chariots used to ride. A continual reminder about the fact that these valuable public spaces used to serve a prior life, and we've basically sacrificed that, the character of that life over to what they mostly consume right now, which is automobile traffic. We can reverse that back, and we can maintain similar levels of accessibility. I would claim that it's lack of imagination that is largely holding us back. So, how do we spark that change? How can we look to what's happening in society as possible flashpoints to see through the fact that roads are our most valuable and possibly quickly changing opportunity to do something different? And that means not doing this. Getting out of this cycle. This is going counterclockwise, let's go clockwise. Let's do something different. Let's do what every study since the beginning of dirt has told us to do in terms of being able to retard our current condition of road fatality and lower the kinetic energy. We know that kinetic energy is a significant contributor to why people are dying, faster speeds, bigger vehicles. And so this is the theoretical construct that we are trying to strive, and we're trying to strive for doing it sooner rather than later, not 8 years from now. So let's slow travel down. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to share with you some ideas. Let's reset the expectations of what a civilized country might do. Let's investigate the systematic problems that we've had with the past infrastructure in the same way we might investigate a plane crash or a rail crash. Let's do it for a car crash. Let's point at some of the systematic components and ensure heightened safety and vitality and access for all modes. In other words, we can't really have our cake and eat it too anymore. And that's where we often go down the path. So almost a year and a half ago, together with my co-founder, we started trying to think through different options of what a city can do, and that led us to basically start a protocol, if you will, of how a city could respond or should respond in these types of conditions. We're calling it emergency streets. It's a rapid, visible response to traffic crashes of all kinds within 48 hours. 2 days. We're going to not necessarily clean it up as quick as possible, but we're going to slow traffic down within 500 meters, maybe a kilometer. We're going to do that through temporary traffic management devices. We've been holding workshops in a number of places across the world, particularly in the US. We now have a partner city, Spokane, Washington, where I'm going to be teaching a class at the University of Washington to actually see what this looks like, to roll such an initiative out. We're constructing a website. We're using some virtual reality simulations on Unity to basically, this is very, very beta. The idea of what we're suggesting, slowing speeds down in the interest of, and doing it within 48 hours after a flashpoint such as a fatality, is generating a lot of resistance. A lot of resistance. And we're looking people squarely in the eye and saying, what is the source of this resistance? Why can't we do this? Can you point to a real good reason for why this is not going to be something that is at least sensible in where I come from, the United States? The responses that we've heard haven't been overwhelming in terms of like convincing us otherwise. So we continue on, and we continue on because we think that really our success space, our solution space in terms of what we've been throwing in terms of these small remedies, little bits of initiative here, initiative there, road safety initiative that, talking about Vision Zero here, they're amounting to very little. And so the only way that we're going to be able to find a better space in this discussion is to do some of these things, which we know that we should be doing anyway, but trying to use opportunities like a crash, unfortunately, to shake people a little bit more than we've done in the past and say somebody actually died here. We know the systematic, we don't know because that's why we need to do an investigation to convince our public officials that, guess what? We can change the street and the sky won't fall. That's really what we're looking to do with this concept, is to use street space as a parameter, as a lever, to see through how we can correlate our traffic fatality crisis with our ability to change our streets, because right now we're not changing our streets in response, and we're continuing on with the same because of the owing to the same rules, regulations, and standards. So it's a wake up. After 2.5 weeks, after 2 weeks, I'd love to open that conversation of what it looks like, because we're open to lots of different feedback. We do not intend that this would be a one-size-fits-all in every different situation and every different cultural context, because most crashes are geographically unique. Most of them are culturally specific in how we deal with it, but there is a systematic component, and that's how much we've prized speed in our transportation system. Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So now I'd like to welcome to the stage Sarah Stace from the Better Streets Network, who I think is one of Sydney's advocacy supremos. She's a city shaper and strategic thinker with over 25 years of experience in urban policy, land use and transport, as well as the president of Better Streets at the moment. Sarah has worked across all levels of government and the private sector, advocating for walkable, people-friendly streets. She's passionate about transforming urban environments. She empowers communities and decision makers to create vibrant, inclusive streets that support active transport and climate resilience. So, Sarah, come and tell us how you're going to do that.
Excellent, thanks. Oh, that is very bright. Okay, I thought I'd pick up on Kevin's idea of these emergency streets, and I asked ChatGPT to create a little image here of sharks versus cars, and it looks like the sharks won. But I'm going to do a bit of audience participation here. Call out a number for, I went and looked at the statistics dating back to 1791, so since white people have inhabited Australia. How many people have died from shark bites in Australia? Call out a number since 1791. What do you think? Sorry? 30? 400? 20, 50, 18? 400's definitely 25. Okay, all right. Okay. What about car fatalities? I only got the figures from about, I think, 1981. So how many car fatalities do you think we've had? Thousands? 20,000? 40,000? How many? Oh, children. Triple that, 15,000? Okay, all right, well, there we go. So there's been 260 shark deaths since for the last 234 years, and 779 seriously injured. And then over here, over the last 100 years, there's been just under 200,000 deaths by car, and 1.5 million seriously injured in just 44 years from motor vehicles. So, anyway, I just thought I'd throw that stat out there. Now, it has been really sad that someone did die from a shark bite recently, and it's been very high in the media. But I thought I'd create a little fantasy headline for the next person that's killed by a car. So I've used the same wording. Experienced walker and dad dies in a ute crash. The street will stay shut for the next 48 to 72 hours, while other neighbouring streets will stay closed for 24 hours. Now, the quote from a member of the public is, "I know people who don't walk would look at us and say that's absolutely crazy, but that's the risk that we accept when we go out for a walk." And I think this is such a great example of motonormativity. This is where we have, I guess that's our primeval brain is telling us that the sharks are bad, which they are. They're pretty scary, like snakes and spiders. And those cute little, the grill of a ute doesn't quite invoke that fear in us. But nonetheless, they're clearly far, far more deadly. And the reason why I came up with this is because actually on my street, last time there was a shark fatality off Little Bay a couple of years ago. Does anyone remember that one? Yeah, okay. So again, they closed all the streets down. They started introducing this drone shark watch system. On Facebook, it's quite cool because they get some pretty nice images for the Bondi one. But on my street, about 2 weeks later, a woman was killed. And they closed the street for a couple of hours, scraped her body off the asphalt, and everything went on. And I asked my council, well, what are you going to do about it? And they're like, well, it's gone to the coroner. We'll just wait for the coroner's inquiry, and look, we don't think there's anything that could be done. Now, that same street, it's just a standard suburban street in standard suburban Sydney, and that same street, my cat got hit by a car and died. My son has been hit by a driver as well. He was just walking to school, and luckily the driver was going quite slowly in this instance, and so he got hit by the wing mirror and winded, but he wasn't injured, and I do thank that driver every day for not driving faster, and my son is fine. But that street is deadly, and it is just a standard suburban street in Sydney. It's not an arterial road. And it's surrounded by lots of schools at the end of the street. So I guess this is where I think we can and should be reimagining our streets and thinking of them differently. So I didn't want to be negative, but I did want to bring up Kevin's central point, that is, we are stuck in this motonormativity that cars have to dominate and have to be there in our public space and taking up streets, and we should just accept that. So that's one of the reasons why myself and a few others amongst here, Megan is also a co-founder of Better Streets, and there's lots of Better Streets members here in the audience. But we set this up with 5 key recommendations. So the first one is that we want to get more kids active. Now, I can see that there are some more vintage people in the audience. You probably remember walking to school. Hands up if you remember when you walked to school. Yeah, okay. Do your grandchildren and children walk to school now? Some do, that's good. And so we want to get that back to 75% of kids being able to walk and ride and catch public transport to school. We also want to make it easy and convenient to walk, particularly by adding more crossings. There are lots of locations around New South Wales that don't have footpaths. And there's also far more places that don't have crossings. And the great thing is in New South Wales, we have changed the way that councils can be delegated to have more control over their local streets, so they don't have to ask permission from the state government to add a crossing now on their local street, and they don't need to meet a warrant. Does anyone know what a warrant is? Yeah, okay. Well, a warrant is this very technical thing where you have to have a certain number of cars and a certain number of pedestrians in order to warrant putting in a crossing. If you don't have enough cars, no crossing for you. And if you don't have enough people, also no crossing for you. We also want to slow vehicles down, and 30 kilometres an hour. The reason why we talk about 30 is because that's what the United Nations Stockholm Declaration for Road Safety says. That was signed in 2020, and that basically says that the survivable speed is 30 kilometres an hour. The declaration's wording says that where people walking or people on the street and motor vehicles are interacting in a predictable fashion, as in we know they're going to be there, like shops and local streets, the street needs to be 30 kilometres an hour unless there is evidence, strong evidence is the word it says, that going faster is safe. Now we flip that the other way around in Australia, where we say, well, 30 doesn't even exist, although it does now in a few states, including New South Wales, luckily, and Victoria since 2 weeks ago. But that is the survivable speed, and so that's why we think all local streets, and we've got a lot of pedestrian activity, should be 30. We also want to boost local business and support local business with outdoor dining, and to make it easy to ride a bike with cycleways. When I put on LinkedIn that I was going to be presenting here, I did say I wasn't really sure what regenerative urbanism is, and someone said we should have a look at the 300,000 streets in Melbourne. Put up your hand if you've heard of this before. No? Okay, all right. Well, Regen Melbourne is basically trying to reimagine streets. They've decided to go for the bold number of 300,000 streets around Melbourne, where they want to regenerate these and bring them back to being streets for people, for vegetation and so on. So they've got, if you jump on their website, which is down here, so you just go to Regen Melbourne 300,000 streets, or Google that, whatever you want, you'll find that they've got a whole lot of resources and materials around what this means for communities and how that's going to be done. So it covers health, reducing pollution and exposure to also to help children play on streets and so on. They've covered waste, heat with passive cooling and urban tree canopy, water. We lose a lot of water through just going through the stormwater system, land use and energy. So if you're interested, jump on there and take a look at that. And they take a very systemic view around what that means. But I wanted to also talk about some really positive things as well, because we have been quite negative. What could this look like? Does anyone know where this is? I'll cover this up. No. This is McKeown Street in Maroubra. Has anyone been there? Yeah, you've been there? Pretty fabulous, right? So I know it's really small, you probably really can't see it, but essentially this is Maroubra Beach here. And there's a lot of buses along here. There was a road that they've just closed off this section to traffic and opened it to people. They initially did it as a temporary pop-up, and they just sort of put some temporary astroturf down and things like that. Really, really popular, and now they've permanently made this change. And anytime you go down there, it is absolutely packed with people, with kids. They play, the seats are at different levels and they can play and so on. So that's a lovely example of a street being regenerated and reimagined and returned to the people. And then I'll finish on this example. This is also in my neighbourhood. This is Clovelly Road. And this is Carrington Street and Clovelly Road. Now, many years ago, when Megan and I first met, we got together on Clovelly Road Better Block. And it was basically the citizens coming forward and saying, we want to reimagine our high street, Clovelly Road, and turn this back to a street for people. And so this was one of them. We suggested closing this very long slip lane here and turning that into a public park, and that has been done. So now, instead of being able to turn like that, the cars have to turn at the traffic lights. Not that hard. There's loads of shops all the way along the frontage here, and this is what it's been turned into. You've got this sort of, again, a very playful, lovely, but it's also got trees and plants and vegetation and joy. So I wanted to end with that as what could regenerative streets look like?
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, I'm sure that all of us could look around our neighbourhoods and see a Clovelly Road or a McEwen Road somewhere where there is an opportunity to just do more, to make our streets feel like they belong more to the community and less to the cars that dominate them. So, Eamon Waterford, CEO, Committee for Sydney. He's a leading urban policy think tank, the Committee for Sydney, not Eamon. He's not. You're a think tank. With a background in strategy and social policy, he's shaped initiatives across investment, culture and infrastructure in New South Wales. He brings a deep commitment to inclusive city making and innovative governments. Under his leadership, the committee advocates for bold solutions to Sydney's most pressing challenges, including sustainable transport and equitable access to public space. So Eamon, come and tell us, why can't we make this happen?
Thank you. Yes, I should note, my role is to black hat this conversation a little bit, so I am going to be saying maybe some things that, I mean, all things I believe, but perhaps not at the same ratios of strength of belief as, you know, I truly believe. But I think it is really important to, you know, two wonderful presentations you've just heard. I'm sure we all agree with all of these things. It seems so obvious, it seems so sensible. How on earth are we not doing these things? Well, we're not doing any of these things, right? And we're way away from doing any of these things. So I think it's useful for us to sort of understand why that is. The other thing I'll note is I completely misread the instructions and thought we were only allowed one slide. And I was like, I'm so cheeky. I've like put animations into one slide so that it feels like it's more of a presentation, but just one slide. But let's just start there. I'm going to show you three different mode share triangles. And I love these triangle things. So what we have here is the proportion of travel that's undertaken by car, proportion by active transport and proportion by public transport. They say bus, but it's actually all public transport. And all of these dots represent cities, and each of those cities, the size of the circle, is represented by the population of that city. And I reckon you can probably have a bit of a guesstimate, but since we're doing good public participation, does anyone have a guess at what part of the world the left one represents? Western Europe. How about that centre one? Pretty good. East Asia, yeah. And then the third one. Yeah, Australia and New Zealand. And I think, no, that was it. That's literally, hey, I say this because what I want to start with is I really want us to understand that solutions that seem to work in places that we'd often point to start from such a drastically different starting point, right? We are talking about tiny cities, thousands of them, that have enormous proportions of public transport and active transport mode share, in comparison to, you know, minuscule amounts, right? It's worth noting Sydney's the best of the lot. Like, this is Sydney over here. We do okay because we're only at sort of 70% driver mode share. It's actually probably more like 85%, but look, the data, whatever. But, you know, like, we're not doing anywhere near as well. And so we need to be realistic. Sorry, and I know this is so confusing. Anyway, we need to be realistic about what we're going to be able to achieve. But let's start with what I believe regenerative streets should be and what I believe we should be able to do on streets. You know, I believe that we should be able to shut down streets for festivals, to party, to celebrate, to bring people together to listen to music. I believe that you should be able to walk down the street and pick up food from the shops on your way from the train station to your home rather than having to do a weekly shop. I believe you should be able to walk down streets to pick up your kids from school and walk home with them, or for your kids to walk alone to their friend's house around the corner. I believe that people should be able to spill out of pubs and be drinking freely on the streets and the cars slowly move around them. I believe I believe that you should be able to drive to the beach if you don't live near the beach. I believe that you should be able to take early morning walks down great streets. There should be a go-to coffee shop that you can walk to where you know you're going to run into people you know. You don't have to make plans with people because you know you're going to see them at the go-to place. It's a coffee shop, it's a park, and it's all within walking distance down great streets. I believe that you should be able to drive on those streets to go visit your family across town or to drive up the coast to go on holidays. And I believe that you should be able to drive at midnight, you should be able to ride a line bike at midnight down the middle of a street with no helmet, drunk, with only one pedal on the bike, and be safe. These are all things that I have done, right? These are things that I have done in my life. It's fair to say I've not done all of them in Sydney. The bike one was in London. I got to say, I was remarkably surprised. One pedal, no helmet. There was a bunch of us in a pack of bikes, but the cycling superhighways in London are fantastic. I genuinely did feel safe. I wasn't that drunk. I mean, I was a bit drunk. But, these are things that I believe that you should be able to do on streets. They're not all walking. They're not all cycling. They're not all driving. They're all of these things. But they are sometimes driving, right? I think it's important to recognise that cars are really, really important. I believe that streets should be places for people, that we should have density in our cities, density done well, and that as a result of that, we'll have smaller homes, but shared spaces, and as a result, bigger lifestyles. That's not what we have at the moment. We have roads, not streets, but roads, and not places for people, but places to withstand, to be got through as quickly as possible, to get off as quickly as you can. We don't have density done well. We have sprawl. We have endless sprawl that's not walkable, that's not cyclable, it's only drivable. And we don't have smaller homes, shared spaces, bigger lifestyles. We have larger homes, private spaces, diminished lifestyles. But despite that, we need to recognise that for many people, driving not only is a really important and only option for them to get around, but it's fun, it's great, it's convenient. It's comfortable, it's reliable, it's flexible. You can get in the car exactly when you're ready to leave. You don't have to check when the next train's coming or whether the bus is going to be late. You don't have to worry about the weather because even if it's raining outside or it's boiling hot outside, the aircon, the windscreen wipers, driving is, for many people in Australia and for many people, a really good option, the best option, and all other options are worse. These are, truths that we need to recognise that we often don't when we have these conversations about roads and streets and how we make them better. Because what a lot of people hear when we say we want to make them better is we want to make them worse. We want to get rid of something that they are really important about. It's often said that people don't resist change, they resist loss. And we need to be realistic and really think about what is it that people are losing when we talk about making these beautiful, fantastic streets where people are riding drunk down the middle of them or they're going to the coffee shop. People are losing. People who love driving or must drive because they have no other option. They're losing time. We're making it slower for them to get home. They're losing time with their friends, with their family, for their hobbies. They're gaining time spent in traffic, unacceptable, unreasonable, unenjoyable time. Obviously, the benefits are huge. We know that a third of the space in our streets are made up of roads, streets. That is an enormous potential public space for us to reimagine public life and big lifestyles. But we can't proceed without appreciating, without valuing, without recognising that the loss that so many people will experience or perceive they will experience as a result of these changes. And that's especially true for certain groups that frankly are not in this room today. Groups that don't come to these sorts of conversations for many reasons. They don't come to these conversations because they're shift workers. 30% of the workforce of Sydney works at night because they don't have time to come to these sorts of things because they're low income or they're just making do because they can't afford to live anywhere near Sydney University. They live in places where they're car bound because that's the only place they can afford to live. They're people who own cars and only drive because they have to chain trips together because they've got to stop off at the shops to get food. Then they've got to pick up their kids from childcare. Then they've got to pick up the kids from school because their kids are in split different locations. The school and the childcare are nowhere near each other. And then they've got to drop it at the train station or at their work eventually. They live too far. Their lives are too complicated. Their trips are too bespoke and nuanced for these sorts of ideas to kind of resonate with them. So we need to be realistic about that loss and really grapple with that and talk to that, speak to that, and recognise what they'll gain. What will they get from these sorts of things? All of a sudden, well, they want that. Yes, they'll be losing a quick trip to the shops to pick food up in their car. But maybe what they gain is a quick walk to the shops, or a shopping centre down the street with affordable food that they can take their kids to on the way home from school, to pick up food on their way home, rather than to needing to get quickly across town with the kids screaming in the back to go and do the weekly shop at the big supermarket down the street. With all of that in mind, we have to be modest about what success looks like for Sydney. We've got a long way to go, and we're not going to get there very quickly. The committee, we believe strongly in the idea of mode shift. We want to get people out of cars. We want to get them onto alternative modes. At the moment, we're talking 70 to 80% of trips every day are taken in car, and at best, we reckon we can probably, at pushing, shift mode share by about 1% a year. So if we want to get to 50%, if we want to get to a point where less than half of the trips every day are taken by car, that's 30 years away, at best. Sprinting hard at this challenge. Of course, that is not, evenly distributed across the city, but actually that makes it even more of a compelling case for us to grapple with this, because it's really easy to do it in the areas that we all come from. Sorry to stereotype, but like the parts of the city that we live in, the parts of the city that this university in, are parts that actually the mode share is already much lower than that, and it's easier to grapple with. It's a hell of a lot harder to grapple with parts of southwest Sydney where it is really hot, where walking is just not a practical opportunity, where the investment that would be required in mature street trees to cool down those streets is 40 years away, even if we planted the trees today. So, in those sorts of areas, we're talking about a mode share that's probably close to 100% car. And so to genuinely, materially improve people's lives, to give them better streets, to give them the sorts of opportunities that I've spoken about, that I envisage we can do on streets, it's a big lift, and people are scared by that, because what you're telling them is, hey, we're going to take away all the stuff that you like, the time that you quickly get through, that you withstand in order to get back to the things that matter to you in your life, and trust us, in the future something will come in and fill that gap. And it'll probably be better. It won't look like anything you've ever experienced before, but trust me when I say it's better. That's hard. And genuinely quite difficult to grapple with, but I don't think this opportunity and this success, and I firmly believe in the goals, we are proud partners of the Better Street Alliance. We are proud advocates for reimagining high streets. Parramatta Road just out here is toxic and can be so much better, and we'll put light rail on and we'll get the cars out. This is stuff that we fundamentally believe, but I also really want us to sit in what I suspect it feels like to me, I hope it feels a bit to you, a bit uncomfortable, a little bit kind of gritty tension of this challenge of the fact that it is actually not that easy for a lot of people, and that we really do need to kind of recognise that and respond to that, and not just barrel forward and say, this is easy, it looks so good, let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eamon. Remind me never to get on a Lime bike anywhere when you're around. I'd like to invite our panel to come up now to answer some questions from the audience. We also have some questions that people have written in with. I think the biggest take home I got from you, Eamon, was this idea that we're not just asking people to change the way that they travel. That's really, for them, got very little to do with it. We're asking for people to change the way they live in many ways. And once you start to put it and frame it in that kind of context, you start to realise the gravitas of what we're asking people to do. And I really liked the way that you got us to engage with that grit. So I think I want to start perhaps with you, Sarah, is what do you say to people when you're advocating for better streets? When you really do get pushback, what's your go-to thing that you will bring up in that context?
I think one of them is that a statistic that I was actually surprised about that Transport for New South Wales released recently when they started putting out public consultation on the Roads Act reform. They said that 40% of residents of New South Wales don't have a driver's licence. And I knew it was around about 30%. They claim it's 40%. It's really hard to actually calculate that yourself, but I'm going to believe Transport on this one. And that's because there are children who clearly can't drive, and people who are older who've given up their licence, people living with a disability, and a lot of particularly younger people these days are choosing not to get their driver's licence. It's 120 hours of driver training and so on. It's also really costly to own a car. So the AAA, the Automobile Association of Australia, says that New South Wales, particularly in Sydney, we're paying about $25,000 per annum, or 17% of household income, on transport. And so I guess my response would be, well, we can't only be providing for the 60% who can drive and can afford to drive, but it also means that that 40% are having to be driven by someone else. And so part of this is about freeing up the drivers from having to give the lifts to the kids, so the kid can go and visit their friend around the corner without having to be driven.
Yeah, great. I'm going to throw to the audience now, if anybody's brave and has questions. Yes, please.
Question, why is the motor...
Oh, sorry, we need the microphone. Sorry about that.
Can anyone tell me why the motor vehicle industry is producing cars that can still hit 220 or whatever it is Ks, when actually the safe speed is 30?
People keep buying them because they make more money putting in stronger engines. People like power, people like grunt, and they'll pay for cars. I'm sure there are companies that have tried to make slower cars and then no one bought them, and so they stopped selling them, stopped making them. I don't, look, I know that's a bit of a flippant answer, but I don't think this is going to come through the automobile industry unilaterally, disarming. Like, clearly the only way you get to, I think, probably the only way you get to slower speeds is government, directiveness, rather than kind of a market-based solution to something like this.
There could be a combination of both, where safety, climate, sort of action, sort of like all those things coming together. I just wonder whether any of those conversations are actually happening.
I do think there's a lot of imminent technological fixes on the table at the moment in terms of geofencing and other technological ways to speed limit. But in a lot of contexts, people don't like being told what to do. We saw that with COVID. And when you've got a lobby as powerful as the automobile industry. But I love that, you've just pointed out the sheer hypocrisy of our competing goals here. And it also speaks to the fact that we have the technology. We know what to do here. This is not something where we need to go around doing further research on, what would be the impact if we slowed streets, how we could do it, etc. This is a very political and cultural problem, and that's where the solution is going to have to come from, I would say. Kevin, did you have anything to?
No, I agree with that. The idea of asking the motor industry to lean into the problem is like banging your head against the wall. And asking the regulators to take a stronger stance is like banging your head against the wall. Which is why I think we have to do a better job of leaning into what resources the public actually has at their disposal, which is the public space in the communities. And we are the ones that kind of supposedly dictate that. We've given that away, but...
Yes, please. Just here. Oh, sorry, we'll go here and then...
Thank you. It's also frustrating when the Department of Transport or the government, they give you one thing and then they take something else away. In West Pennant Hills Valley, south of Castle Hill Road, west of Pennant Hills Road, we eventually got, after a lot of lobbying, a very good bus service into the city, which people used. The buses were crowded. They put in the metro, which is north of Castle Hill Road, and in spite of lobbying for a commuter bus to service that station, they took the bus service away that was servicing the valley. You can't get to the station, Cherrybrook Station, late at night. Unless you drive, you can't get to the metro. So they have taken everyone in that valley back to driving. So people were using the public transport that was there, but then it was taken away.
Yeah, I mean, Eamon, do you have anything to say about, that's sort of indicating that there's definitely a community appetite for the kinds of lifestyles that we're speaking of. It's just that being able to imagine it and then enact it in practice. Do you have anything to say about your take on where the temperature of the community is at the moment with this in Sydney?
Yeah, well, like, I actually think the community is more supportive of this sort of stuff than government is often, and that's partly because government has, you know, a rules-based mechanism for determining road space allocation and speed limits and the like that were mostly developed 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and, you know, people who are trained on it who are like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we know that vast swathes, the majority of council areas in this city have parking minimums, i.e. they require, when you build a new apartment block, more parking spaces than the average number of cars that people own in that area. So the community is already driving less than government requirements for parking for cars. So those cars are never coming, and there's, you know, it's getting worse. So I do think the community is more on board with some of this stuff. And I guess the other point, you know, I know I was being sort of doom and gloom about, like, be careful with change, people hate change because they'll lose something. People also get over change quite quickly, right? Like, once they experience a new opportunity and they say, you know what, I'm used to it now, I've habituated that and actually I quite like it, people can kind of move on.
This is the suburbs. People can't get anywhere without public transport.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So they have deprived all these people of an opportunity to use public transport. I was just going to add a statistic to that. So Australia actually reached peak car in 2004. So it's been 21 years. And what I mean by peak car is the number of kilometres driven per capita has been dropping year on year since 2004. But I think a lot of our modelling doesn't sort of take that necessarily into account. The overall numbers have increased because of population increase, but yeah, sorry.
No, great. Nancy, just here.
Thank you. Having been in a completely autonomous vehicle driving across San Fran on a Friday night, a question for any of the panelists: how do you think autonomous vehicles will change urban structure, lifestyle, the idea even of a car and driving, and will it in fact reduce drink driving, speeding, distracted driving, and all the things that you're all studying?
I think I have to share a moment that I had yesterday with some colleagues in Melbourne, speaking to a PhD student who's doing research onto the use of autonomous vehicles by families. And for the first time in the United States, they're allowing children to use autonomous vehicles. So basically, your parents put the child in a car and send them off to their friend's house. They feel much safer about putting the child in an autonomous AV rather than one with a driver. And I cannot fathom why something about that sunk into my stomach. It was a very disturbing reality for me. And you're right, Nancy, in that AVs do have capacity to change. And I think for the last 20 years, we've been fumbling around this. The research is moving far more quickly than the regulatory acceptance and so forth. So we still have a way off with that. But for the panel, maybe Kevin, I don't know whether you've done any work in this space recently, but how is it going to reimagine our cities?
When it comes to the autonomous vehicles, I'm of two minds. The first is that, like I learned about hydrogen many years ago, it's the energy of the future and it always will be. Well, we're actually making inroads on that, and hydrogen is an energy source. So we have to come to the fact that, you know, they are going to come, but we've been talking about it for a very, very long time. So until they do, what can we do to make sure that we don't make more harm? And that's what I would claim. I'm kind of modally agnostic when it comes to whether they should be autonomous or not. But why do they need to be so big? And why do they need to go so fast? And why can't we just have a governor as soon as we have a certain metropolitan density of X people per hectare, and no vehicle whatsoever is going more than 30 kilometers per hour?
Yeah, I think AVs, if they do come to fruition and they're privately owned, could be an absolute unmitigated disaster. And I say that because, you know, I've got a 12-year-old at home, and wouldn't it be great if he could get picked up after school and his soccer boots are in there and it takes him to the park, and then, you know, grandma needs to be taken to the hospital, so the AV, her own AV takes her, and then actually the dog needs a walk. Why don't we just pop it in the AV and take it down to the park? So yeah, I think I'd like to think that it'll improve road safety, for example, but I do worry if we're unwilling to govern the speed of vehicles from 220 kilometres an hour as a maximum speed, are we willing to do that sort of control of AVs as well? I don't know.
I mean, I would just point out, like, I see why you see that as an unmitigated disaster, but there'd be a very large number of people who saw that scenario you just described as like, that sounds incredible. Amazing. That sounds great. My grandmother is, my mother is, you know, is very ill, and, you know, this, like, those are benefits that I can see, not necessarily, yeah. One thing I think that is interesting in this conversation about sort of rate limiting cars and the like is like that actually one potential benefit is that you can immediately reduce the speed limits on roads when they're autonomous vehicles without needing to do all of the streetscape changes. You know, one of the things we know is if you make a 30-kilometre-hour street but make no sort of physical changes to the street, people just drive faster, right? They will, because the cars will let them. The AVs won't be allowed to do that, won't be able to do that, and therefore there'll be, you know, opportunities for kind of improvements to the relationship. That's a very sort of niche use case, but I think it's a good one potentially.
I think, I mean, it draws to the fact that we need to establish as a community, as a society, a new rudder that is guiding where we're going. We've got this technology coming, and if we don't have an outcome in mind that is clearly articulated and championed by people who are in power, then there are a lot of possibilities for things to go bad. So it's a great point in case in point to bring up. Yeah, actually there was this gentleman here at the back, and then go here. Oh, we're okay for time, and then I'll go to you, Colin. Thanks.
Yes, the big change that can come across Sydney is the TOD development, the transport-oriented development, which is going to, around selected railway stations or other transport hubs, change that place, increase the density around that place, and the character and the social composition of it as well. Does that represent an opportunity to address these issues, the traffic issues, perhaps through mandatory considerations for that place, and also by the treatment of the streets, so new character perhaps is added to it, and the streets actually act to increase the social interchange across that new place?
Absolutely, yes it does. I mean, one of the key challenges we have in Sydney is the people who have the strong understanding and desire to make improvements to local streets, being councils, have no money, and the people that have cash to do this stuff have no interest in fixing the problems, often, you know, roads groups within the Department of Transport. TOD basically unlocks a whole bunch of extra cash, right? Development contributions, as the character of the community changes because more people are moving in, gives cash potentially for investments in that local infrastructure, street trees and, you know, cycleways, slowing down streets, improving the amenity of them. A lot of the TODs, I mean, there are 42 of these TODs. There's a lot of them around Sydney. Some of those local areas are pretty scrappy, right? Like I live in one of the very scrappy ones. The local streets are awful. It's not that they're sort of, you know, car dominated, and oh, actually they are very car dominated, and they're very unsafe, and I don't let my kids play outside our house because they'll get hit by a car and they will die. Like, this is an opportunity to do that, but also just beautification, making it a place that you feel like you want to spend time will be a huge improvement.
I think it comes back to the density done well, doesn't it? I mean, there's no point in densifying if it's not going to be a place that is going to allow you to do the things that you're trying to get in that outcome.
Jennifer, if I can just add one element to these conversations that I've noticed over the years is that we assume that all urban systems, like a transit-oriented development, kind of operate at the same speed. But if we're introducing our problems, as you did at the outset of the
we're entering the era of polycrises, in which, I mean, you know, we got so many crises happening in our urban systems. We got housing, we got climate, we got transport, safety. I mean, what can we do tomorrow and not have to wait 10 years for? That requires us to really look through our urban systems and what can be done more quickly, rather than talking about these things like TODs. And in other words, I'm strongly encouraging us to change the narrative of how we have talked about these things in the past.
And I guess I'd add one more thing. I think TODs is great, the transit-oriented, but it also needs the word "put" in there, like pods. It needs to also be pedestrian-oriented, because you can have one without the other. And to be really successful and make them livable, we need to be thinking about that, calling them pedestrian-oriented developments.
Yep, the question here.
I actually have a question. Queensland introduced 50-cent public transport. Are you aware of that? Could anyone speak to that and whether Sydney that's possible to happen in?
Oh, I feel like, are there colleagues in the room that worked on that study? Looking at you, Steve Greaves. Did ITLS do some? John. That was John. It's John's not here. we did do a big study on that at the University of Sydney, so I feel like I shouldn't be speaking in that space. If anybody else...
No, you should give us the answer. Did it work? Did it induce more public transport travel?
I haven't read that paper yet.
Oh. My sense, this is my guess, and it's purely just a hypothesis, is that it probably was really good in that it led to an immediate burst of change patterns, because people said, oh, 50 cents, that's going to get me over the threshold to change my habits and get on the bus, get on the train. Long term, it's probably not that good because it leads to less money going into public transport. Primarily, people are not choosing not to catch the train because it costs $5. There are other reasons they're not. Public transport is cheap compared to almost every other mode other than walking and cycling. Cost is not the barrier that is stopping most people from using public transport. So 50-cent fares doesn't necessarily, you know, get over a real threshold. But I think as a conceptual, you know, jump, I think it was a probably very helpful thing in getting a bunch of people to try it out.
It's also about the messaging, isn't it? About the state government putting their hand up and saying, we actually really want you to use public transport, and we're going to put our hand on our heart and, you know, put our mouths where our money is and money where our mouths are, and let that happen. I think that's an important component as well, as much as the actual behaviour change component with that whole program is the way that it changed the narrative about what the government was interested in. So,
I have the information here because I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, and this is a slide from the Department of Transport and Main Roads in Queensland. 50-cent fares have made public transport affordable. Patronage is up 15% year on year, and 5% increase on pre-pandemic levels. And 67.4% of people use PT at some point in the first full quarter, up from 56. So I think you're right, Eamon. And then my memory of the conversation was those that were next to public transport benefited, those that had no access to public transport didn't. Yeah. So how do they increase the opportunity for people to use it?
Thanks. See the audiences that we attract here, like that calibre. Thank you. Yes, this gentleman here, please.
I know,
Please. Please, this poor guy has been waiting. I apologise, please.
Thank you. I have a question actually that brings it maybe back to the ground about money. Because, bit of background, I'm originally from the Netherlands. I used to work with streets of 5 meters wide, and then I came to Australia 15 years ago, and I saw regular residential streets of 12 meters wide asphalt. This is so much space to do something else with. I have students enough who had tons of ideas, at our office also tons of ideas, but it comes back to how do you pay for those 7 meters of asphalt to be taken out and to be used for something else, so that people can actually experience that it creates a better life. And you do it for a street, and then other people can experience, you do it for another street. But you need to start. Where do you get the money? Who's going to pay for it?
Kevin, can I throw this to you, and I hope I'm not going. No. How have you budgeted how much emergency streets would cost?
Yeah, we have a number of different estimates, for example, of depending on if you're just doing fatalities versus fatality and severely injured. We've also budgeted what it means to do it for a kilometer in each direction or a half a kilometer. We've also budgeted what it means to, in any rates, it depends on what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything really expensive. We're not talking about removing the asphalt. That's super, super costly. And I think we have to be taking Eamon's advice here. I think we have to be realistic about what we can do and what we can do tomorrow. But I strongly think that you're talking about it in the right dimension. It's just that it's hard to conceptualize that to decision makers because we can't even get the conversation going about repurposing the space. Even after a fatality, those conversations, I don't want to say they're non-starters. I wouldn't be doing this if I thought it was a lot of non-starters. But given the difficulty of that, the conversation that you're asking is even more difficult.
I have a slightly different response to your question. I'm working on a project at the moment in the Central Coast. And in there's a whole lot of, particularly the older suburbs, where they don't have footpaths, they don't have curbs and gutters. And it's going to be way too expensive for council to put in footpaths. And so we had this, Mark's in the room as well, we had this community consultation and everyone's sort of scratching their chins to think, how are we going to solve this problem? And then someone said, oh, what if we reduce the street speed? And everyone's like, oh, what you mean down to 30? And they really got on board. All the people from the community were like, that's such a brilliant idea because it'll cost hardly anything. You don't have to put in all the footpaths, etc. And it means our kids now we don't have to push a pram on the grass just to get to the local school. We can go on the street. So it's, if you almost flip the script sometimes on those. And I think the other one is we don't have to repair every single street right away. I think if we start to showcase examples like the ones I did show, those ones were fairly expensive, but initially they often start as a temporary pop-up. The one that I gave for the Clovelly Better Block example, it was just one day and it was just the community. So I think you can do this through these sort of incremental changes over time. And over a 40 or 50 year asset renewal program for a council, then they can start to be making those changes as they go.
I just make the point that it is expensive in the remit of, and the concept of how much money there is to go around for these sorts of things. It's of course not very expensive compared to how much money we spend on many, many other things. You know, the health budget in New South Wales is $35 billion a year. That's a lot of money, could convert a lot of streets now. There's a few sick people that need hospitals, we still build those. But you know, part of it is also probably about reconceptualising where funding comes from to solve for problems, you know, that are dealt with only at the chronic point rather than at the preventative point. Because of course we know getting people walking and cycling is really great for people's health. And you know, that is a common problem. How do we deal with homelessness? Well, let's look at how much we spend locking homeless people up in prisons and take some of that money and give them bloody houses. Turns out it's cheaper to do it that. You know, these sorts of different ways of thinking about the vast pools of money that we have for chronic and acute problems and how we sort of shift that funding into preventative solutions.
I do want to draw attention though to Lee Waters in Wales. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. September 2 years ago now, very courageous politician, woke up and said, I'm going to change the street speed to 20 miles per hour, pushed through it, experienced extreme resistance. It cost £28 million in the beginning. Pretty much, I think it costs about $2 million for us to construct 1 laneway or 1 kilometre laneway of roads, so a very, very low budget. They changed the street speed, and I do disagree with you a little bit, Eamon, in that you don't need expensive infrastructure to get people to drive more slowly, because they saved 10 lives in the first year. They have an increased uptake of walking and cycling. Their insurance premiums are down, and it was a very, very cheap exercise. Where it was costly it costed a lot of political capital. And that's where I think we're having trouble getting people to spend. Yeah. I've seen quite a few hands go up and I'm having a bit of trouble keeping up. This lady here, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Hi. Kind of on a similar topic, but to target another part of the system that maybe could help with that. The BCRs and the business cases and how we analyze and cost the benefits of infrastructure projects. Normally, and I work in Ballarat in a regional city, we've been struggling to sell the benefits of all the public health, livability, economic, everything that comes from active transport and sustainable transport. But then normally the cost-benefit analysis, the business cases, look at cars and the time, travel time, and these as the money, as the benefit. So to get your thoughts, please, on that as well, on how can we change, incentivize? I know it's a systemic change, but also that's what we are struggling at the moment, and maybe there could be a pathway.
Throw that to the panel.
I go for it, Nikki. I think, firstly, one of the things I've worked on in my day job is changing the parameters that go into the business case assumptions in the first place. So now, if you go to the national guidance, you'll find that place is now added in, so you can value place in a business case. Back in 2010, active transport wasn't even included in that, so now it is. And health benefits are massive. You know, it's well over $5 a kilometre in the health benefits alone just from walking. And so the part of the solution, I think, has been changing the assumptions that go into the business cases. If you can't change the system, at least amend a few things. I think the other one is that there are business cases out there that stack up massively for walking and cycling, yet they remain unfunded. So I don't actually think that business cases are the solution, because they're there. They showed, you know, we did one for the whole of Greater Sydney for cycling, over $5. If you spend $1, you get $5 back. The same with walking, you get $4 back. I think the other one is who that argument is going to. So councils bear the cost of walking and cycling infrastructure. They own the vast majority of roads, and the cost to them is huge. But the benefits, the national economic benefits, don't go to councils, it goes to federal. It's the health budget goes to federal. Our climate obligations go to federal. Exactly. Yeah. So something like that fiscal imbalance, so about 94% of the Australian tax goes to the federal government, but the cost of roads and streets is on councils. And so it's of no interest really to a council to save on the health budget.
And all I would say on the other side, so much of the sort of travel time saving valuation is complete bullshit. Right? Like nobody values at $60 an hour saving 2 minutes by a slightly quicker trip in their car. And yet, like, huge proportions of the benefits are these incremental improvements for people that are imperceptible to the average person. And because they happen to be, you know, driving to work, it's counted at $60 an hour or whatever the number. Like crazy, crazy, crazy numbers, completely fictitious and worth calling out to be like, no, actually, I call bullshit on this. I know we've been using this number for so long, but it's never been true.
All right, I think we're actually coming to the end of our time, but I was determined to make this a positive thing. So I want to, for each of our panellists, I'm going to ask you, what is something that you are hopeful about? Kevin, thank you. I mean, you're coming from the States, so if you can talk, then we're... It's all right.
I don't know if many of you were, you know, back of, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years ago, Stuart Brand put out that thing called the Whole Earth Catalog. You remember, some of you? And then if you read more of his writings, he wrote this book, God, I can't even remember the name of it now. What's it? How Buildings Learn. How buildings learn, and how buildings can adapt, and how they can be used as fuel for regenerative spaces and whatnot. I truly feel as if we've kind of lost sight of the analog to what that building, what that book tells us for streets and how streets can learn. And whether, well, first of all, whether streets can learn and how streets should learn. And I encourage each of us to kind of think through what that means of how we can create better streets and what the theory says, what the science says, and what we need to do to put ourselves on a more, shall we say, focused path towards a new North Star, which might actually require us to leapfrog where some of these current conversations are and not get mired down into these same kind of conversations that have largely stagnated our past ability to move the needle on these issues. And so it requires a kind of open-mindedness to see how streets could learn.
Eamon.
I mean, I'm hopeful. Like, I think the debate we're having in Sydney at the moment around housing gives me some hope that we can have a similar kind of conversation as a city about challenges around transport and travel and streets, because like it's been a very, very rapid agreement that we're going to have quite a significant change to our city, and we've by and large got on board with that. And obviously there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we've fixed housing affordability, but we are, you know, fundamentally we've shifted as a community what we say is acceptable in terms of the rate of change within a sort of 9 to 12 month period, quite dramatically. I also am hopeful about the extent to which, you know, the community supports action on climate change and the costs they're willing to bear to solve for that. Of course, you know, a lot of water to go under that bridge, probably a big flood or two to go under that bridge. But like, by and large, I am hopeful that, you know, humanity and Sydneysiders are showing themselves capable of adapting to quite dramatic change to solve big problems.
Yeah, I was listening to a quote the other day. I think it might have been Noam Chomsky or someone said that he's strategically an optimist and tactically a pessimist. I'm still thinking that one through. But so I like to think in terms of big, long-term strategies. Can we get that long-term change while moving the sort of chess pieces around for the short-term sort of tactical, which is one of the reasons we've created Better Streets, because we wanted to give everyday people across Australia a voice and the resources to be able to make changes on their own local street. So whilst they can operate, our sort of strategic response is, what if everybody in Australia had access to those sorts of resources and could ask their local council out of the 500 or so, is there 500 councils across Australia, something like that, to make those changes on their own local level. And as a microcosm example of that, I remember 2019 it was, I was at a National Road Safety Conference. It was chaired by the then Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, big fancy building in the city at Bligh Street. And I was invited along and I was not only one of the few female women in the room, certainly one of the younger. And I piped up and I said, I think for road safety we need to think about 30. And there was this deathly silence in the room. And then someone came up to me afterward and said, you were brave. Now, here we are, just 7 years later, and we can have this conversation. We've had people like Lee Waters here. We can have these sort of, you're not shot down or pointed out to be a weirdo. And there are councils around Australia, in Western Australia of all places. In fact, the automobile lobby of WA has come out saying that reducing road speeds by 10 kilometres an hour would have a huge impact on road fatalities. So it's becoming more mainstream in a remarkably short space of time. And that's, I guess, what keeps me going.
Well, that's going to wrap up our session. I think that the thing that makes me hopeful is the fact that we get people like you in a room together and panels like this. This is part of the Festival of Urbanism, which is going in Sydney until the 20th of October. No, September. Oh. This whole week. It's check it out on the website. It's all thanks to the Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Initiative. We need an acronym for that. Please stick around. There is going to be a tour of the museum. I have a feeling you might have needed to register for it, but I'm sure there's a way we can work around that. And there's a session on later this afternoon, Regenerating Civics, Urban AI, Social Media and Post-Truth. So, thank you all for joining us.